The moment Cynthia stood up in the middle of the church and pointed straight at me, I knew something awful was coming. Her voice cut through the quiet like a knife. "That's the woman who begged my husband to take her back." Every head turned. The air shifted. People stared at me like I was some pathetic character in a drama they hadn't been warned about. I felt my throat tighten, my chest burn. I wanted to vanish. I didn't cry. I didn't defend myself. I bit my lips so hard it almost bled. I sat there perfectly still, trying to keep the shame from spilling out of my eyes. She wasn't finished. Cynthia let out a sharp laugh and added, "I almost feel sorry for her." I looked down at my hands. My fingers were trembling. I had only come for my son, for Ezra. It was his special day. I had no idea his father's new wife would try to destroy me in front of everyone. But before I could stand up and walk out, Ezra let go of my hand. He stood up, walked calmly to the front of the church, and asked the pastor for the microphone. I barely had time to react. He turned toward the crowd, holding that mic like it weighed nothing, and said, "There's something you all deserve to know about my mom." The entire room froze. No one said a word. Even Cynthia went silent. And in that moment, as my 12-year-old son faced a room full of adults, I knew something was about to change. I hadn't stepped inside that church in almost 3 years. Everything looked exactly the same. The faded red carpet, the dusty wooden pews, the cross behind the pulpit catching the sunlight just right, but it felt different. Not because the building had changed, but because I had. My name is Amara Whitlow. I'm 34, a mother of 1, and officially divorced for 1 year and 7 months. I never planned on being a single parent. I never imagined I'd be sitting alone in the same church where I once stood in a white dress, smiling at a man I thought would love me forever. When my mother, Gloria, told me there was going to be a special youth service at the church and that Ezra was invited to be part of the dedication, I hesitated. I knew who else would be there. Darren, my ex-husband, and her, Cynthia, the new wife, the one he married less than 6 months after our divorce was finalized. "Ezra wants you there," my mother said, brushing her hand over my shoulder as we stood in my kitchen that Tuesday night. "You don't have to stay long. Just come for him." I agreed, because I couldn't bear to let him look into the crowd and not see me. That Sunday morning, I wore a soft blue dress I found on sale and tied my braids back into a neat bun. I practiced my smile in the mirror, but nothing could hide the nerves in my eyes. Ezra came into the room while I was checking my earrings. He wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. "You look pretty, Mom," he said, voice muffled against my back. I kissed the top of his head. "Thank you, baby." Ezra is 12, but thinks like he's 15. Too observant, too wise. He noticed things most kids didn't. He never asked me why his dad left. He just watched the quiet dinners, the nights I thought I was hiding my crying, the way I folded his father's leftover clothes and put them into boxes without a word. We pulled into the church parking lot and I sat in the car longer than I should have, staring at the doors. My stomach was twisting. My palms were cold. Gloria looked over at me, gently touched my hand and said, "You belong here just as much as anyone else." Inside, the music was already playing. The sanctuary was almost full. I spotted Darren near the front, his arm around Cynthia's shoulder. She looked back and made brief eye contact with me. No smile, no nod. Just a look that said, "You're nothing now." We sat toward the middle, close enough for Ezra to be seen when his group was called up, but far enough away that I didn't have to breathe the same air as Darren. I focused on Ezra. He looked so grown up in his gray button-down shirt and little navy blazer. When he waved at me from the front row of the youth section, I smiled back and felt a lump rise in my throat. I remembered how hard things had been for both of us. After the divorce, I worked part-time at the daycare while finishing online courses to become a licensed assistant teacher. There were nights we split boxed mac and cheese and laughed like kings because I refused to let Ezra feel the weight I carried. I'd pawned my wedding ring to pay for his summer camp because he had always dreamed of going. I sold my car and took the bus for months to keep him in his school. I never talked bad about Darren to him, not once. I didn't want Ezra to grow up resenting anyone. I just wanted him to feel safe. As the service began, Pastor John welcomed everyone and the kids started their songs. Ezra sang quietly but proudly. I clapped like any other proud mom. I thought we were going to get through the morning without drama. I really believed I could slip in and out without incident. Then Cynthia stood up. The room was still. Pastor John hadn't even invited testimony, but she walked to the front like she owned the place. She smiled wide and asked for the microphone. I felt my stomach turn. My mother leaned in and whispered, "Ignore her. Just breathe." I tried, but I could already see where it was going. The smug smile, the sideways glance, the way Darren shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I sat there in silence, bracing myself. I came to that church to support my son, but Cynthia came for something else entirely, and I was about to be the target. Cynthia stood at the front of the church with the confidence of a woman who believed she couldn't be touched. She flipped her hair back and gave the congregation a bright, rehearsed smile. Pastor John, clearly unsure what she was doing, held out his hand to gently take the microphone, but she shook her head and kept talking. "I just want to thank God," she said, her voice too loud, her tone too sweet, "because when He closes one door, He opens another." A few people nodded politely. A few clapped. She wasn't done. She looked right at me, then back at the room. "And I especially want to thank Him," she continued, "for saving my husband from going back to a place he was never meant to be." People began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. She turned toward the front row where Darren sat, not moving a muscle. "That's the woman who begged my husband to take her back," she said, pointing at me. "She's sitting right there." Gasps rippled through the church like a sudden storm. Every eye turned toward me. Someone in the back muttered something under their breath. I sat frozen. My heart slammed against my ribs like it was trying to get out. My mother reached for my hand, but I didn't grab it. I was trying not to fall apart. "I mean," Cynthia added with a bitter laugh, "it's a little desperate, don't you think?" Pastor John stepped forward quickly. "All right, let's redirect our attention to the youth. That's what today is about." Cynthia backed away, finally handing the microphone back. She shrugged like it was no big deal, but the damage was done. No one looked at the stage anymore. No one cared about the kids. All eyes were on me. I couldn't breathe. My face felt hot. It wasn't anger at first. It was shame, humiliation, a sick heaviness pressing down on my chest. I had worked so hard to hold my dignity together, to never speak a bad word about Darren, to let him move on with his life. And this is what I got. Ezra was sitting with the other kids at the side of the pulpit. He looked from me to Cynthia, his jaw clenched. I knew that look. He was trying to decide whether to say something or stay quiet. I caught his eyes and shook my head just slightly. I didn't want him involved. This was mine to carry. My mother leaned in. "You don't have to sit here and take this. We can leave." I whispered, "No." If I leave, she wins. I turned my gaze forward. My hands were shaking in my lap. My stomach was tight, and I could feel tears burning the backs of my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I refused to give her that. I wasn't going to let Ezra see me fall apart, not today. I could feel the weight of judgment from people who didn't know the full story, who never saw what happened behind closed doors, who didn't know how hard I fought to keep my family together before it all unraveled. I remembered the night I found the messages on Darren's phone, the quiet apology he never said out loud, the way he moved out like he had already planned it weeks in advance. I remembered the day he introduced Ezra to Cynthia at the park like she was some family friend, when she was the very reason we weren't a family anymore. I had never told anyone I begged him to stay, but I did. Once. In our kitchen, after Ezra went to bed, I asked him to give our marriage one more chance. He shook his head and said, "It's already over, Amara." Now here she was, turning that one moment of vulnerability into a weapon, dragging it into the light in front of my child, my church, my neighbors. I sat still. I didn't cry, I didn't run. But inside something snapped. Not in a violent, vengeful way. It was something quieter, more final. I realized in that moment that Cynthia didn't just want Darren. She wanted to erase me, to humiliate me so deeply that I would never lift my head again. I refused to give her that victory. I looked at Ezra again. He was watching everything. His eyes were darker now, not with confusion, but with purpose. Before I could say a word, he stood up. He walked down the steps from the youth section without looking back at me, moving slowly, but with a quiet kind of power. He walked straight up to Pastor John and said something too softly for me to hear. Pastor John looked surprised, then bent the microphone down and handed it to him. The room, still buzzing from Cynthia's outburst, grew suddenly still. Ezra took the microphone in both hands. He turned toward the crowd, cleared his throat, and said, "There's something you all deserve to know about my mom." Ezra stood at the front of the church with the microphone in his hands. His shoulders were squared, his chin lifted, and his voice steady in a way that didn't match his 12 years. He wasn't just standing up for me. He was reclaiming the moment that Cynthia had tried to turn into my public humiliation. The sanctuary, which had been buzzing with whispers just moments ago, had gone completely still. "There's something you all deserve to know about my mom," Ezra said. I held my breath. My hands were clutched together in my lap. My mother was frozen beside me, her eyes wide with both fear and pride. I wasn't sure what Ezra would say, but I knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them keep tearing me apart. He looked out at the crowd, scanning the faces of people who had known us since he was born. "She didn't come here to cause problems," he said. "She came because I asked her to. I wanted my mom to be here today." His voice wasn't loud, but it was clear and strong, and it carried through every corner of that sanctuary. You all heard what someone said about her, about how she begged my dad to come back, but none of you were there. I was. I saw everything. Some people leaned forward in their seats. Darren shifted in his chair but didn't move to stop him. Cynthia's smile had disappeared. She stared straight ahead, arms crossed tight across her chest. Ezra continued, "My mom didn't scream. She didn't fight. She didn't try to keep my dad from being happy. She just cried when she thought I was asleep. Then she'd wake up the next morning and make me pancakes, like nothing happened. She always put me first." His eyes flicked toward Darren, then back to the crowd. "She sold her wedding ring so I could go to summer camp. She took 2 jobs when the car broke down so I didn't have to switch schools. And when I asked her once if my dad was a bad person, she told me no. She said he was just figuring things out. She never talked bad about him, not once." My throat tightened. I could feel tears finally breaking through, not from pain, but from something else, from love, from being seen. "She's not perfect," Ezra said, "but she's the strongest person I know." There was a long pause. Then he looked over at me. "I just wanted you to know that before you judge her." He handed the microphone back to Pastor John and stepped down from the platform. People were stunned. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was reverent. It was the sound of truth settling into the room. Pastor John cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ezra. That was a powerful testimony." Ezra walked back down the aisle toward me. I stood up to meet him halfway. As soon as I wrapped my arms around him, the tears came freely. He buried his face in my chest and hugged me tightly. Someone clapped, then another. Slowly, the church began to respond, not with thunderous applause, but with something softer. Gentle, honest appreciation. It wasn't about me being right or Cynthia being wrong. It was about a boy who had spoken the truth when no one else was willing to. As we sat back down, I felt a shift in the room. The eyes that had stared at me with judgment earlier now held something different. Compassion, respect, maybe even regret. Cynthia didn't say another word for the rest of the service. She didn't stand up again. She didn't look in my direction. Darren didn't either. But I could see the way he looked at Ezra now, not just as his son, but as someone who had just become more of a man than he'd ever been. After the service, Pastor John came over to us. He placed a hand on Ezra's shoulder and said, "God gave you a voice for a reason. Don't ever be afraid to use it." Ezra nodded, and I thanked him quietly. We walked out of that church not with our heads down, but with our hearts lifted. Ezra had done something I never could have asked him to do. He had taken my pain and turned it into power, not through anger or revenge, but with honesty. And in that moment, I realized something important. I had spent so much time trying to protect him from the truth, to shield him from the damage. But maybe what he needed wasn't protection. Maybe what he needed was the chance to stand in it, speak through it, and show the world who we really were. And he did it with more grace than most adults ever could. We walked back to our seats and sat down quietly, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. People no longer looked at me with suspicion. The whispers had stopped. Ezra's words were still hanging in the air, thick and heavy with truth. Pastor John tried to return to the service. He moved forward with the final portion of the youth dedication, but the energy was different. No one was really focused on the kids anymore, and even they seemed distracted. The story that had just unfolded pulled everyone's attention away from the program and towards something deeper. Darren stood up slowly during the closing prayer. For a second, I thought he was leaving, but he didn't head for the aisle. He walked up to the pulpit. Pastor John looked confused but gave him a nod. Darren reached for the microphone. My pulse picked up again. My mother tensed beside me. Ezra leaned forward, watching his father closely. Darren cleared his throat. His voice was quiet but clear. I wasn't planning to say anything today, but after hearing what my son just said, I think I need to. The church was silent again, but not in anticipation. This time, it felt like the silence of accountability, the kind that demands something real. I made a lot of mistakes in my marriage, Darren said, more than most people know, and I never took the time to acknowledge what Amara went through when our relationship ended. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't want to meet his gaze. I wasn't sure if I believed he was being honest or just embarrassed, but I let him speak. She did ask me to try again once, he continued, and I said no. But what I didn't say is that she never begged. She didn't cry or scream or threaten. She asked me with quiet strength, with hope. And I turned my back on her. He glanced over at me then, and I finally looked up. There was something different in his expression, a kind of rawness I hadn't seen in years. I should have spoken up when Cynthia made those comments. I should have stopped it, and I regret that I didn't. People shifted in their seats again, but this time it wasn't from discomfort. It was from surprise. Maybe even admiration that he admitted what everyone else was too proud to say. I've watched Amara raise our son with love, patience, and dignity. I don't deserve the grace she's given me all this time, but I just want to say that I see it now, and I'm sorry. He handed the microphone back to Pastor John and walked back to his seat beside Cynthia. She didn't take his hand. She sat with her arms crossed, her jaw tight, staring ahead like she had just been hit with something she never saw coming. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Darren. She didn't say a word. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still, at peace, in a way I hadn't felt since before my marriage began to unravel. For the first time, I saw the full picture from the outside, who I had been, what I had endured, and who I had become. The closing prayer was short. The congregation bowed their heads, and Pastor John kept it simple, thanking God for truth, for healing, and for strength. After the service ended, a few people approached me, not out of pity, but with quiet understanding. I had no idea, one woman whispered, touching my arm gently. You raised a good boy, another man said, nodding toward Ezra. My mother hugged me tightly. He learned it from watching you, she said. Ezra stood by the door with me as people filed out. Darren gave him a soft smile and patted his shoulder before walking to his car. Cynthia followed behind him, but didn't speak. She walked quickly, her heels clicking hard against the tile floor, her back rigid. We didn't need another word. Her silence said enough. Outside, the sun was bright. Ezra and I walked to the car hand in hand. Are you okay, Mom? He asked, looking up at me. I smiled down at him. I am now. There were no big scenes in the parking lot, no dramatic exits, just a quiet kind of closure, the kind that doesn't come from shouting or revenge, but from truth being spoken out loud by someone you love. Ezra had stood up for me when I couldn't stand for myself, and Darren, even if it came late, had acknowledged what needed to be said. I drove us home with the windows down. The wind whipped through my braids, and for the first time in a long while, I felt light. Not because things had been fixed, but because I no longer carried the weight of being misunderstood. That Sunday, my son reminded me that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it speaks in a soft voice behind a quiet face, from a heart that has seen everything and still chooses truth. The next few days passed quietly, but something inside me had shifted. I went back to work at the preschool that Monday, greeted by the usual sticky hands and high-pitched laughter. Nothing had changed outwardly, but I carried myself differently. My shoulders weren't so heavy. My smile came easier. I didn't feel like I was holding my breath anymore. That evening, I stood at the stove while Ezra sat at the kitchen table, working on his math homework. The smell of garlic filled the air. I watched him from across the room, pencil in hand, brow furrowed in concentration. He looked up suddenly and said, "You know I meant everything I said, right?" I nodded and turned down the burner. "I know. I'm proud of you, Ezra. You were brave." He gave me a small smile, then went back to his homework. He didn't need praise. He didn't do it for attention. He spoke up because something inside him knew it was right. That's the kind of person he's becoming. Later that night, I got a text from Darren. It was short. "Darren, Ezra's lucky to have you. I see that now." I stared at the message for a long moment. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing else I needed to say. I wasn't looking for closure from him anymore. I had already found it. The next Sunday, I returned to the church, not for any special service, just a regular one. I wanted to see how it would feel. When I walked in, a few people greeted me with warm smiles. One woman hugged me. Pastor John waved from across the room. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I sat down in the pew, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. After the service, Pastor John approached me. He asked if I'd consider helping lead the new support group for single parents they were launching. I hesitated for a second, then said yes. Not because I had it all figured out, but because I knew what it felt like to walk into a room and think no one saw you. I knew what it meant to have someone stand beside you, even when it was hard. That week, I started writing in a journal again. Not about the past or the pain, but about the small moments. Ezra laughing in the back seat, my mother bringing over a casserole, the way the sun poured through our kitchen window in the morning. These moments didn't erase what happened, but they reminded me of who I still was underneath it all. Strong, steady, still standing. I realized that I had spent too much time letting other people's stories about me shape the way I saw myself. Cynthia wanted to humiliate me. Darren had once made me feel disposable, but my son, with 12 words and a microphone, gave me something no one else could. He gave me back my voice. People like to talk about resilience like it's some big dramatic thing, but sometimes resilience looks like showing up anyway. Sitting in the same church where you were humiliated, not because you want to prove anything, but because it's where your story deserves to be heard. Sometimes it looks like making dinner, helping with homework, walking past the people who once judged you, and smiling anyway. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's real. Ezra taught me that strength doesn't always come from adults. Sometimes it rises from a child who's been watching quietly, who sees the truth long before the world catches up. I don't know what Cynthia tells herself about what happened. I don't need to know. She showed everyone who she was, and so did I. The difference is I didn't need to say a single word. My son said everything that mattered. And because of that, I no longer carry the shame. I carry the story, the real one. The one where a woman lost her husband, found her dignity, and raised a boy brave enough to speak when it counted. The one where silence didn't mean weakness. The one where grace spoke louder than revenge. The one where truth stood up and asked for the microphone. And everyone listened. Thank you for listening to my story. Maybe you've been where I was. Silenced, shamed, misunderstood. Or maybe you're raising a child and wondering if they truly see you. I hope this reminded you that strength comes in many forms and that even when life tries to break you down, your quiet resilience can speak volumes. If this story touched you, please like the video so more people can find it. Share it with someone who might need to hear they're not alone. Leave a comment and tell me what part hit home for you. I read every single one. And if you want more real stories about healing, motherhood, and reclaiming your voice, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. Your story matters too. Keep telling it.